I'm Alex, your host for today's episode of Touching Lives with Dr. James Merritt. Dr. Merritt has a great sermon ready as he is preaching a series on marriage and parenting. He is almost ready to go, but first let me tell you about a great resource available to you as you watch the broadcast. We've created a booklet called God's Design for Marriage and Families, and you can download this free booklet right now from our website at touchinglives.org. Thank you for joining us today, and now here's today's sermon from Dr. James Merritt.
50 years ago, if you walked into a movie theater and saw a movie, there were only two possible ratings it could get, and the moviegoer got to decide. 50 years ago, you had good movies and bad movies. That's it. And then in 1968, the Motion Picture Association of America came along, and they developed what's known as the film rating system, and you're probably familiar with it, but if not, or if you've forgotten, I'll refresh your memory. If it's a G-rated movie, that means it's general. Anybody can go. You can take little kids, you can take grandma, you can take anybody. It's all good. PG calls for parental guidance because there may be material that may not be suitable for young children. PG-13, they kind of raise that up and say, well, that calls for parental caution because there may be some material that's not suitable for pre-teenagers. That's why it's PG-13. And then R, of course, means that anyone under 17 cannot get in unless they're accompanied by an adult. And then NC-17 means two things. Only adults can see them, and you're probably a pervert, okay? So, even though only 1 out of 3 movies get either a PG or a PG-13 rating, those rated movies, those rated PG or PG-13, make 70% of the money in the movie industry. In other words, parents vote with their pocketbooks, people vote with their pocketbooks. We really would rather see, most of the time, movies that fall in that PG or PG-13 genre. When it comes to children, I believe that God desires all children to be raised in a PG home where parental guidance is not just suggested, it is required. We're in a series on parenting, and today we're talking about PG parenting. And let me just say at the beginning of this message, I want you to know, parents, that I sympathize with you and I empathize with you, and I get it. Parenting today is far more difficult than it was when I was a parent. At the same time, your job's never been more important than it is today. And one of the reasons why is because a lot of parents fail to realize, some too late, there's a big difference between having kids and raising kids. Anybody can have kids. Raising kids, that's another matter. In fact, I want you to listen to this following statement. It's so true. The pain of childbirth is twofold. There is the pain of bringing the child into the world, and there's the pain of bringing that child up in the world, and the latter is greater. The physical pain of bearing a child is tremendous, but usually lasts only a few hours. But the pain of rearing that same child lasts a lifetime and never lessens. That's so very true. And I got to thinking as I was working on this series back several weeks ago, I got to thinking about just how much has changed since I had kids at home. I mean, everything's changed. The culture's changed. The view of the family's changed. Technology has made communicating with kids and teenagers so much different and so much more difficult. I'll give you a perfect illustration of this. Back in the day, if you will, this is kind of the way things evolved and the way things operated. You would meet someone, maybe you'd meet them at school, or you'd meet them in college, or you might even meet on a blind date. And we used to have an old-fashioned term. You would court that person, right? So we don't call that courting anymore, but that's really what we call it. You would court or you would date that person. And if the relationship got serious enough, then you would bring them home to meet your parents and hopefully to build a relationship with them, and then you would get married. That's kind of how it was done back in the day. Well, today, everything's different. Today it can be done like this email that a girl sent to her dad. Dear Daddy, I'm coming home to get married soon, so get out your checkbook. I'm in love with a boy who lives far away from me. As you know, I'm in Australia, but he lives in Scotland. We met on a dating website, eHarmony, became friends on Facebook, had long chats on WhatsApp. He proposed to me on Skype, and now we have 2 months relationship through Viber. My beloved and favorite dad, I need your blessing, good wishes, and a really big wedding. Lots of love and thanks, your favorite daughter, Lily. Now, I want you to listen to how this dad responded. Dear Lily, like, wow, really cool, whatever. I suggest you two get married on Twitter, have fun on Tango, buy your kids on Amazon, and pay for it through PayPal. When you get fed up with this new husband, sell him on eBay, love your dad. Everything's changed. Totally different than when we got married. Totally different than when I had children. We live in a cyber world. We're digitalized. We're computerized. I mean, listen, think about this. Be honest. How many times a day, parents, if your kids are teenagers, how many times a day do you look back and realize that you texted with your kids more than you talked to your kids? I mean, it's incredible. There's a website that two brothers created. It's a cool website. It's called crazythingsparentstext.com. And they have compiled private text messages between parents and children. It's really hilarious. And I just picked out one. This is one of my favorites. This is a text dialogue between a father and a son. Son, what time are you picking me up? Dad, who is this? Son, it's your son. Dad, how did you get this number? Son, I programmed your phone. Remember? Dad, how do I delete people? That's the age we're living in. That's the day that you're trying to parent in. And I get it, I understand. And yet even in this modern cyber computerized space age in which we live, the raising of children, in my opinion, is still the most important job in the world. It is the most crucial job in the world. Everything rises and falls on how we raise our children. See, our job is not just to leave this world a better place for our children. Our greater job is to prepare our children to make sure they leave the world a better place for their children. And I'll be honest with you, as I look back over the last couple of generations, I think the results are kind of mixed. So what I want to do today as I talk about PG parenting is I want to raise a question. It's a simple question, very thought-provoking, and I think very crucial. Matter of fact, I think if you're a parent, I cannot think of a more important question you ought to ask yourself as a parent than this question. Here's the question. What should you want for your kids? Not what do you want, what should you want for your kids? Dave Muir is a columnist for New Man magazine. And in that magazine, he talks about different issues concerning the family. He wrote this article about parenting, and he wrote these words, and I thought this was kind of humorous, but it's true. He said, child development professionals categorize kids into two main groups. One, naturally compliant, intrinsically kind, inherently logical children, and two, your children. But then he goes on to note this. All parents hope to get their children in category number one, but they end up with children from category number two. So what kind of children do you want to produce? If you could go out, if you've got young kids or you've got teenagers, if you could go out 5, 10, 15 years from now and you could see the end from the beginning, what kind of an adult do you want that child to become? What kind of life do you want that child to lead? What kind of eyes would you want your child to see their world through? And what I'm going to share with you today, it's not guesswork. It's not Dr. Phil type of advice. It's not something coming from some well-known psychologist. It's not even what I'm going to tell you as your pastor. God tells us in a particular passage of Scripture what we should want for our children and how we should get them there. Now, if you missed last week, I want to encourage you, please go back and listen to last week's message, because these two kind of are a tandem, they kind of go together. You might say this is part 2 of last week's message. Last week, we talked about parents, and we addressed parents specifically. Today, we're going to look at the product of what we as parents should want to produce in that child. So we're going to go back to where we were last week. So if you bought a copy of God's Word, iPad, smartphone, I want you to turn to a book in the New Testament called Ephesians. We're in Ephesians chapter 6. And as you're finding that passage, I just want to share with you what PG parenting looks like from God's point of view. I want to share with you what our Heavenly Father tells every father and every mother what you should want for your children, what you should want to produce in a child, the kind of adult you should want your children to become. Paul tells us through the Spirit of God, there are 3 things that every parent should want for their child. Number 1, We should want our children to live rightly. Now listen to what he says in Ephesians 6 and verse 1. He says, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Now, if you read that carefully and you read your Bible very often, you'll pick up there's something super unusual about that verse. So, well, what is it? Well, let's look at the first word. It's one of the very few times that the Bible is specifically addressed to children. Most of the time when you pick up a Bible, you just assume that it's addressed to, older kids or to adults or whatever. But in this particular passage, Paul is writing specifically to children. It's very interesting. Now, what he also says is, parents, you're in the background. And he talks about children obeying their parents. He says, okay, parents, your home's like a school and you are the professor. And the first lesson in the school of life, you've got to teach every child. You've got to teach lesson number 1 is Obedience 101. And I'll tell you why. You already know this. Children, from the time they're born, they're not born with a tendency to obey you. They just have this natural ability to disobey you. They don't have this proclivity to do what you want them to do. They have this proclivity to do what you don't want them to do. Obedience does not come naturally to a child. Disobedience comes naturally. And so Paul is telling us that teaching your children obedience and the way you teach them changes, by the way. Let me just tell you, it changes at different stages of life. You can't teach a child to obey the same way when he's 5 as when, for example, he's 15. You don't even use the same methodology. I read about 2 moms, and they were at different phases of life, and they were watching their kids play on the playground, and they got to talking about their kids, and one of the moms said this. She said, isn't it ironic that we spend the first 12 months teaching our kids to walk and talk, and the next 12 years telling them to sit down and shut up? I mean, it's just kind of strange. Well, you know what? There's a truth to that. You can't teach kids the same way. You can't deal with kids the same way. When they're young, what do? When they're young, you spend almost all your time telling your kids what to do and what not to do. Don't do this, do that, can't go there, can't go here, do that. That's what you do. But as they get older, you don't tell them what to do or what not to do. You train them to help make good decisions about what they ought to do and what they ought not to do. Now, the method changes, but the goal is the same. And let me just tell you something that's going to be hard for you parents to do, and I had to learn it the hard way myself. But let me just get you ready. None of us want to see our kids make mistakes. None of us, right? I get it. Let me just help you on something. I don't care how good you think little Throckmorton is right now, okay? I really don't care. Your kid's going to have train wrecks. I'm just telling you. You're going to have times in your life, he's headed for a train wreck. She's headed for a train wreck. You've waved the lantern. You've waved the red flag. You've done everything you know to do. And they are determined, I'm going to wreck my train. You're going to have to let them wreck the train. But then you've got to be there, not just to correct them, not just to say, nah, I told you you're going to wreck the train. Because some of the greatest lessons your kids will learn in train wrecks. And you need to be there and say, okay, what can we learn from this mistake? Now, notice, by the way, even though he's talking to children, he's really addressing this to parents. Because it is the job of the parents to teach their children to obey. And obedience, by the way, is expected for both parents. You notice he says this, children, obey your parents. Now, today, we don't even yawn at that. We say, well, of course they'll obey their parents. Let me take you back to last week's sermon. Had you lived 2,000 years ago, your jaw would have dropped. Because ladies, I hate to inform you, but 2,000 years ago, if you lived in Roman culture, you lived in Greek society, you had one job as a woman, bear the child, have the child. That was your job. Once that child was born, now you were to care for the child, you were to meet the needs of the child, but when it came to obeying, he didn't have to obey you. That child did not have to obey the mom. He had to obey the dad. That child didn't have to obey the mother. He had to obey the dad. He didn't have to honor the mother. He had to honor the dad. All of the honor and all the obedience was due to the father. Then Paul comes along and says, oh no, that's not God's plan. Children are to obey both the mom and the dad. They are to honor both the mom and the dad. And it was so revolutionary because Paul comes along and says, I don't care what Roman culture says. I don't care what Greek society says. Dad's not up here and mom's not up here. They're equal. Mom and dad deserve the same respect from the child. They deserve the same love for the child. They deserve the same honor and the same obedience. But there's also something Paul says is equally important. He says, not only are you to teach your children what's required, that is, they are to obey you, but he said they need to understand why they are to obey you. So listen to what he says. He says, for this is, what's that word? Say it again real loud. Right. Don't hear that a lot anymore. Right? I don't hear that a lot anymore. You know what Paul's saying there? There are certain things that are right that are always going to be right. And there are certain things that are wrong that are always going to be wrong. And parents, it's your job to teach your kids the difference. It's our job as parents to teach our kids what's right, what's wrong, what is the difference, and to do right and to act right. It is right for children to obey their parents, and parents are to teach their children what is right. But parents, listen, this is our responsibility. It's not the job of the school. It's not the job of the church. It's not the job of the government. It is the job of the parent to say, hey, there's right that's always right. There's wrong that's always wrong. You need to understand the difference. So let me just kind of, if you don't mind, take a little time out here. Let me just tell you 3 basic lessons every parent ought to teach their kids about right and wrong, okay? Number 1, there is a difference between right and wrong. Now, if you're a believer, we believe that God has told us which is which. That's what I believe, all right? But there's a difference between right and wrong. Number 2, you are to do right and not wrong. And this is big. Number 3, if you do wrong and not right, you're going to suffer the consequences. Now, I don't do this often, but I just want to get on just a little soapbox. Not a big one, just a little bitty soapbox, okay, just for about 30 seconds, so just hang with me. I'm up to here with this victim mentality we have in our society. It is time to teach our kids to own up for what they do. And it's time to teach adults to own up what you do. If you do wrong, don't blame your environment, don't blame this, don't blame that person, don't blame this. Get over it, as the Eagles used to sing. Get over it and realize, take some ownership for your own responsibility in your own life. We've got to teach our kids that whole mentality. Look, listen, there's right that's always right. There's wrong that's always wrong. You need to learn how to tell the difference. You do right and act right, and if you don't do right and act right, you're going to suffer the consequences. Teach your kids to live rightly. Second lesson, teach your kids to live respectfully. Live respectfully. Listen to what he says. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment, with a promise. Parents, it's not enough just to teach your kids to do what you tell them to do. It's not enough to just that they obey you. You're to teach them to honor you. You know why you're to teach them to honor you? Because if you don't teach them to honor you, they won't honor anybody else. They won't honor their school teacher. They won't honor the police officer. They won't honor people in authority. That's why you need to teach them there's such a thing as respect. There's such a thing as honor. I do something. You can think I'm nuts if you want to, and I'm not trying to butter anybody up. Patricia's been with me. She'll see this. I'll be at a gas station or I'll be somewhere and a police officer pulls up, state patrol, whatever. If I get a chance, I will make it a point to go up to that police officer. I just want you to know something. I appreciate what you guys do for us. I appreciate you men and women. You lay your life on the line for us every day. And we don't like it when you pull us over for speeding or running a stop sign. Nobody really gets into that, right? And you want to say you a bunch of hypocrites, you do the same thing, but you don't tell them that. But seriously, we need to give honor to whom honor is due. Honors due parents. Honors due people in authority. Respect. There's just a certain thing that we owe certain people. And you say, well, wait a minute now. What's the difference between obedience and honor? Real easy. Obedience is an action that you do on the outside. Honor is an attitude you have on the inside. When you honor someone, you respect them. So let me tell you what that means. You not only should teach your children to obey you, parents, but you should also teach them there's a right way to obey. Obey without griping. Obey without complaining. Obey without moaning or groaning or back-talking. It's just as important to teach a child right attitudes as it is to teach a child right action. And by the way, a child cannot honor his parents without obeying his parents.
It's been a great sermon so far, and Dr. Merritt's final points are coming up. Before we return to the message, I'd like to share with you a little bit about who we are. Touching Lives exists to touch the lives of the lost and enrich the faith of the found. And we accomplish these goals by the grace of God and through the generosity of people just like you. I'd like to invite you to partner with us financially because together we can continue reaching people all over the world for Jesus. Donating is safe and easy. Go to our webpage at touchinglives.org and look for the donate button near the top of the homepage. If you enroll as a recurring monthly donor with a monthly gift of $50 or more, we have a very special gift for you, an official Touching Lives partner coin that we hope will remind you to pray for the lost each time you see it. No matter if you're able to give or not, please pray for us as we minister to people all over the world. Your prayers are worth more money than you could ever send. And now let's get back to Dr. Merritt's sermon.
But you can obey your parents without honoring them. See, let me tell you the difference. There's a difference between being childlike and being childish. When you're childlike, and children are childlike, and I'm going to talk about this next week, when children are childlike, they're just simply being children. They're being open. They're being transparent. They're being honest about how they feel. Nothing wrong with that. But when they're being childish, they're selfish. They have a rebellious attitude. They talk disrespectfully. They throw temper tantrums. And what I want you to understand is this. It's okay for a child to be displeased that you ask them to do something. That's okay. You know, I can tell you right now, I've never seen a child yet that's told to clean his room that does it with joy in his heart. It's okay. But what they must do is they must not be disrespectful in how they obey. Now, this is a great word. Let me just say this while I'm in the territory. This word honor is not just for small children, it is for grown children. That verb honor, you wouldn't know this, but in the Greek language, that's in the present tense. Let me tell you what that means. In the Greek language, and the verb is in the present tense, it means continuous action that never stops. So here's what that verse literally says. Honor your father and mother, and don't ever stop honoring your father and mother. Now let me give you an example, because I'm in this stage of my life. I've got 3 sons. 2 of them are here. One's in New York. They're now at the stage of their life. They don't have to obey me. I don't tell them what to do. I wouldn't tell them what to do if they let me tell them what to do. I don't want to. I've done that. I've been their policeman long enough. Let somebody else take care. Let their wife run them. I've done that business. No, I don't want to do that anymore, okay? They are no longer to obey me. But there will never be a time in their life that they cannot and should not honor me. There's never a time they should not honor their mother. I mean, that never happens. Obedience stops, but honor never does. Now, let me say this. There are 2 stages in honoring your parents. And I want to say one, because some of you are in one of those 2 stages right now. Stage 1 is when you honor your parents by doing what they tell you to do. If you live at home, and if you're a younger child or a teenager or whatever, the way you honor your parents is by lovingly, respectfully doing what they tell you to do, doing it with a right spirit and a submissive heart. That's stage 1. But everybody grows out of stage 1, but now you get into stage 2, and here's the difference. In stage 1, you honor your parents by doing what they tell you to do. But in stage 2, you honor your parents by doing what they need you to do. You honor them by taking care of them. You even honor them after they're gone if they give you a request to do something they can no longer do. You are to honor them by what you say to them and the way that you say it. And by the way, let me just tell you this. I don't care how old you are. If you've got parents who are living, you know the old saying, actions speak louder than words. Well, words sometimes speak louder than actions. You should honor your parents always in the way you talk to them and the way you address them. Now, I get it. I understand it. You know, nobody can make you madder than the people that you love and the people that love you, right? Okay? My parents sometimes made me angry, and I made them angry, and, all that kind of. But let me tell you, no matter how angry you are, you never, ever get too old to honor them by the way you treat them and the way you talk to them. When my dad was on his deathbed, two nights before my dad died, pardon me, my brother Rick and I were up there, and we didn't know he was going to be dead in 48 hours, but we were up there and spending some time with him, and Mom wasn't even in the room. It was time for the talk. It's just, if you ever get there, you'll know. It was just time for the talk. And he looked at me and Richard, and he said, now, boys, make me a promise right now. Always take care of your mother. No matter what your mother needs, you always take care of your mother. I want you to promise me. Boy, right there, I said, Dad, I promise you, I will always take care of Mom. And we kept our promise. We always looked after our mom. And then I remember when my mom, a year ago or so, was a little about a year and a half ago, well, no, about maybe a year and a month ago, about 2 weeks before she died, I was over in her room, and it was just me and her, and I walked in, and she was asleep, and I didn't want to bother her, and I sat there for a little while, and I just got to looking at my mom, and I just got so sad, and I just walked over to the window, and I was looking out the window, and my life flashed before me as a little boy, and here's my best friend I've ever had, and my mom I was mama's baby boy, you know, and all that's flashing before me, and man, I just teared up, and I heard Mother kind of say something. I turned around, and Mom was awake, and so we just locked eyes. I know I can see it like it happened yesterday. We just locked eyes. She didn't say a word, I didn't say a word, but she saw the tears in my eyes, and she teared up, and it was our way of saying, Mom, you're not going to be here very long. Son, I'm not going to be here very long. I just kind of almost ran over to her, and I kind of picked her up. She's so frail. I picked her up a little bit out of the bed and hugged her and kissed her and told her how much I loved her, how much she meant to me. And I put her back down, and she looked at me. She said, won't you make me a promise? I said, yes, ma'am. She said, always take care of your brother. I have a deaf brother, Mike. Always take care of your brother. Promise me that. I said, Mom, I promise you that I'll always take, and I do. And Teresa does a great job helping me do that. See, my mom's in heaven. My dad's in heaven, but I'm still trying to honor my parents by just doing what my mom and dad asked me to do. Now, watch this, watch this. It's not just the right thing to do or the required thing to do. Paul goes on to say this. He said, it is a rewarding thing to do, because listen to what he goes on to say. Honor your mom and dad so that it may go well with you and that you may enjoy long life on the earth. Let me tell you what that means. Here's what God says. God says, I'll tell you what, I'll make a deal. You honor your parents, I'll honor you. How's that for a deal? You honor mom and dad, I'll honor you. Now, let me ask you a question. Why is that true? Why is it true that if you'll obey your parents and honor your parents, listen, you kids listen. You're a teenager, you listen to me. Why is it true that if you'll honor your mom and if you'll honor your dad and obey them, it will go well with you and you'll enjoy long life on the earth? Think about it. Here's why. If you've got a godly mother and you've got a godly father who love you and they want what is best for you, and you obey them, you don't have to like it, don't even have to understand it, but you obey them and you honor them. Let me tell you what will happen. Your mom and dad are going to save you from a lot of sin and a lot of sorrow and a lot of suffering and a lot of heartache and a lot of headache. You know why? They've been down that road and they know what's down there, and excuse my language, it ain't good. But when you do what they tell you to do and you honor them, you know what will happen? You won't be running with the wrong crowd. You won't be doing the wrong thing. You won't be caught in the wrong place at the wrong time because you honor and obey your parents. So let me just tell you parents something. Let me kind of help you out on something. When you're trying to teach your kids to obey and honor you, if you even get a whiff that they're thinking, well, I know why you want me to obey and honor you, because it's good for you. You need to sit them down. So let me tell you something. You know why I want you to honor and obey me? Not because it's good for me, it's good for you. God says if you honor me and obey me, he says, you know what? It'll go well with you. And I just might give you long life on the earth. So teach your kids. I mean, if you had a dad like me, I had to honor and obey, or my life would have been long on this earth. Okay, now look. Teach your kids to live rightly. Teach your kids to live respectfully. And then here's the last thing. Teach your kids to live reverently. Now, I purposely left out 3 words I didn't really pick up on. I want to go back to verse 1 and pick up on them. He says, children, obey your parents. What's those words? In the Lord. Obey your parents in the Lord. Now that raises a question. So what does that mean? What do you mean, obey your parents in the Lord? Well, in a parallel passage that Paul wrote to another church called Colossae, he wrote these words, children, obey your parents in everything, for this pleases the Lord. That's what it means to obey in the Lord. It pleases the Lord. In other words, Paul said, teach your children to live in such a way that they always please the Lord. Now, obviously, that begs the question that the parents are godly parents, that they know the Lord, and they want their children to know the Lord. So let me just help you out on something. One of the greatest questions, your children, you know what you're raising your kids for, right? To get out on their own. I told you. There's that stage where you tell them right from wrong. Then they go into that stage where you can't tell them what's right and wrong. Now you teach them how to discern what's right and wrong and do the right thing. So that's what you're trying to teach them to do. So they're going to fly the nest. They're going to graduate from high school. They're going off to college. They're going to move off to another state. They're going to join the military. They're going to be somewhere else. And how are you going to send them off? Well, may I suggest that you teach your kids to ask one question. Before you do anything, before you go anywhere, before you say anything, before you take part in anything, before you join this group or that group, before you do any of that, would you just please, son or daughter, just always ask yourself one question. Would this please the Lord? Just ask that question. What am I about to do right now? Would this bring joy to the heart of the Lord? Well, what I'm about to do right now, would this bring a smile on the face of the Lord? You may not know this. I spent the first 3 years of my ministry as a student pastor. And that's why I've always been interested in parents, and I love children, but I have a deep love for teenagers because my first 3 years back, that's really what I thought God had called me to do originally. I wasn't going to be a pastor. I was going to be a student pastor. And then, God changed all of that. But I've never lost my love for youth student ministry. I've never lost, and then if I could go back and do it again, if I was a young person again, really young, and I could have any job in the church, I love student ministry. I always have and I always will. Well, one of the things that you get to do when you're a student pastor is you really get to interact with parents. And as I observed parents, I realized there's only two kinds of parents who parent children. And I'm telling you, this is true. You can take this to the bank. And by the way, you fall in one of these two categories. I've seen it time and time again. And by the way, I don't have to be around parents very long. You give me about 3 hours with a parent. Let me kind of be in their home. Let me kind of find out what their habits are. I can almost tell you just like that exactly how they parent their children. One of two ways. There are some parents, and they raise their kids by looking at the culture. So here's what they do. They take their cues from Modern Family. They say, okay, I guess that's the way family really is supposed to be. And so they let Hollywood tell them how to raise their kids, and they let entertainers tell them how to raise their kids, and they kind of watch the cool parents around them on how to raise their kids, and they say, okay, I guess that's how I'm supposed to raise my kids. And so they're parents who they are looking at the culture. But then you've got parents, and they listen to Scripture. They don't take their cues from Modern Family. They take their cues from an ancient book called the Bible. And so here's what these parents do. These parents teach their children early on there's such a thing as right and there's such a thing as wrong, and God decides which is which. It's not up for majority vote. It doesn't matter what the polls say. It doesn't matter what the pundits say. It doesn't matter what the Supreme Court says. It doesn't even matter what the law says, because just because something is legal doesn't make it right. There's a lot of things in this country that are legal that are an abomination in the eyes of God. But godly parents say, you know what? I get it. I know what the culture teaches. I know what they're all saying out there. But we're going to be different. I not only want you, son or daughter, to understand the difference between right and wrong, and I not only want you to know the difference and how to discern it, I want you to stand for what's right. If nobody else will stand, I want you to stand. I want you to speak up for what's right. Even if everybody sits down and shuts up, I want you to speak up for what is right. I don't want you to live by the opinion of your friends. I don't want you to give a rip about what the latest movie star says. I want you to live your life by the Word of God. Because at the end of the day, you don't have to answer to Beyonce or to Jay-Z or to anybody else. You got to answer to God for what you believe. So while I'm in this territory, can I get on one more soapbox? You're going to hear this from your kids. I heard it from mine. Well, everybody else is doing it. Everybody else believes it. And I'll tell you what I told my kids. They're here, they'll tell you. I said, I got two problems with that. Number one, your last name is Merritt, not everybody. And what's worse is this, number two, I don't care. And let's just be honest. I'm not trying to be ugly. I'm not trying to be arrogant. I'm not trying to be macho man up here. There are just certain things, you can just pick some things out. Let's just take two. Let's take abortion and let's take marriage. I don't give a flying squirrel's rip what the Supreme Court says about marriage. I don't care. I don't care what's popular. I'm not running for anything. I'm not running for office. I'm not down. I'm not mad at anybody. I want to love everybody. I want to reach everybody. I don't care what Planned Parenthood says about abortion. I just don't care. I'll tell you what I do care about. Here's what I do know. So this is not even in my notes, and this is when I get in big trouble. That's just a passion for me. I just want all of you to think about this. And by the way, this is one of those, save your emails. You're not going to change my mind, so just, happy Mother's Day. I want to say to these pro-choice people out there, are you glad that you weren't aborted when you were born? I would think you are. Well, let's just take the golden rule. How about doing to the unborn child what was done for you? I mean, we could go at this all day long. There's no logic you can give. I'm just being honest. I'm sorry. If this makes you mad, apologize. I'll forgive you. There's no logic to the pro-choice position. You're not a woman. I don't have to be a woman. I'm for pro-choice. I'm for unborn girls and boys being allowed to live, given a shot at what we were given a shot at. You say, well, I don't like that. Doesn't matter whether you like it or not. I care about what's right, and I care about what's wrong, and God says what's right, and God says what's wrong, and if we don't get back as parents to teaching our children this, it doesn't matter who we put in the Oval Office. It doesn't matter who's on the Supreme Court. It absolutely does not matter. That's why this whole parenting series is one of the most important series I will ever do in my life. Because it all rises and falls. The country rises and falls. The world rises and falls. Culture rises and falls. The church rises and falls on what kind of a job we do as parents and the kind of children that we raise. So, listen, again, I get it. It's tough being a parent. It's difficult. But never that more important. Somebody has well said, children are a great comfort in your old age. And they can help you reach it a lot faster. It is so true. So let me help some of you out here, because I don't want to put anybody here on a guilt trip today, okay? I really don't. Let me just kind of say this. We'll wrap this up. I wish I could guarantee every parent in here the kind of child you're going to, the kind of adult your children are going to become. I can't guarantee that, and you can't either. I wish I could guarantee every parent in this room you're not going to make mistakes, but you are. I wish I could guarantee every parent in here, you won't have any regrets. You will. I did, and I've been there. You, in the end, cannot control what that child is going to become. You can't do that. I'll tell you what you can control. You can control two things. Number one, that you make a personal surrender and commitment of your life to Jesus. And number two, that you do everything you can to lead your children to make that same commitment to Jesus. And I want to tell you, the best gift that you'll ever give your children is a guarantee that when they die, they're going to heaven. And that when they die, they're going to meet a Creator, not as their judge, but as their Heavenly Father. And if you fail to do that, I don't care what else you do, you will have flunked PG parenting. So let me just close with this, and we're going to say amen, goodbye. One of the most fascinating animals you'll ever see, and if you ever see one, be very appreciative. One of the most fascinating animals you'll ever see is a seeing-eyed dog. I cannot tell you what fantastic animals they are. They're called guide dogs. Fantastic animals. So I got to reading the other day when I was working on this series, I got to reading about how they train these seeing-eyed dogs, and it was really, really fascinating. Do you know the first thing that when they take a dog that's not been trained at all, do you know the first thing they teach that dog? I would have never thought about this. They teach that dog what is called intelligent disobedience. I thought, what is intelligent disobedience? Here's what they do. The first thing they start teaching the dog is not to obey bad commands, not to obey an unsafe command. So, for example, the very first thing they teach a guide dog to do, and this makes perfect sense, right? The very first thing they teach a guide dog to do, don't cross the street when traffic's coming. So that's lesson one. So the dog doesn't go any further till he learns you don't cross the street when traffic is coming. That's big time important. Then I learned that only then, after they train that dog to intelligently disobey, then they train that dog to have impeccable manners. because they've got to go into places of public accommodations like restaurants and grocery stores and public transportation. And if you ever go into one of those places and you see a seeing eye dog, just watch that dog. He is a lot more well-behaved than most of the adults doing the shopping. And then they're taught to have an eagerness to please and a willingness to work and to obey and respect their master. Man, I put that in my brain and I thought, well, that about covers it. Don't obey commands. Don't do things you shouldn't do. That's check one. Check two, when you go to these places, don't act like an adult, act like a dog. And number three, above all else, obey and honor and respect your master. And I thought to myself, if we desire that in dogs, how much more should we desire that for our kids?
We are so glad you tuned in here on the Touching Lives digital channel, and we hope you enjoyed the sermon today. Be sure to click and follow this page and feel free to leave any comments below. We'd love to hear your thoughts from today's message. Look for a new episode to be posted on this channel each Sunday. In the meantime, check out our free resources at touchinglives.org. Thank you so much for watching today. I'll see you right here next time for another episode of Touching Lives with Dr. James Merritt.
Teaching people everywhere who Jesus is and why they need Him. This program is sponsored by Touching Lives Ministries and is made possible by the grace of God and your faithful prayers and gifts.